Get to the murder of actor-director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele.
Their son, Nick, is now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Meanwhile, we're learning more about his troubled past and a family fight the night before they were found stabbed to death in their Brentwood home. Our Rob Hayes joins us live from downtown L.A. Rob.
Yeah, Nick Reiner is expected to be arraigned tomorrow, but the district attorney today said he and his office have already decided to charge him with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and because of special circumstances, he could be facing the death penalty. The wait is on 2 days after Nick Reiner was taken into custody, accused of stabbing his parents to death.
December 14th, 2025, Brentwood, Los Angeles. One of Hollywood's most beloved directors and his wife are found brutally murdered in their own bedroom. The suspect? Their own son. But this isn't just another family tragedy. This is a story about delusions, conspiracies, and a mental health system that failed everyone involved. Rob Reiner gave us some of the most iconic films in Hollywood history. When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, A Few Good Men. But on that December morning, his story came to a shocking and violent end. Brentwood, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Los Angeles, home to celebrities, moguls, and the wealthy elite. Tree-lined streets with multi-million-dollar homes hidden behind gates and manicured hedges. It's the kind of place where privacy is paramount and scandals are quietly swept away. But on the afternoon of December 14th, 2025, there was no hiding what happened at the Reiner residence. Police responded to a call at the sprawling estate in the upscale Brentwood neighborhood. What they found inside would send shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. In the primary bedroom of their home, 78-year-old Rob Reiner and his wife, 70-year-old Michele Reiner, were discovered dead. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office would later describe their injuries as multiple sharp force injuries. In other words, they had been stabbed to death. Not once, not twice, multiple times. The attack was brutal, sustained, and personal. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be stolen. This was something far more sinister. According to sources close to the investigation, it was their daughter Romy who made the horrific discovery that afternoon. She arrived at the family home, likely expecting a normal visit with her parents. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. She found her parents in their bedroom, lifeless in a scene too gruesome to fully describe here. Imagine that moment. The shock, the disbelief, the sheer horror of realizing that the 2 people who gave you life are gone, taken in the most violent way imaginable. Romy immediately called 911. Within minutes, the Brentwood neighborhood was swarming with police cars, crime scene investigators, and forensic teams. The Los Angeles Police Department worked quickly. They secured the scene, began processing evidence, and started piecing together what had happened. But they didn't have to look far for a suspect. Within hours of the discovery, detectives had identified a person of interest, and it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a burglar who had broken in during the night. It was someone who lived on the property, someone Rob and Michele knew better than anyone, their 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner. Nick was arrested that same evening in downtown Los Angeles near the University of Southern California. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't on the run. He was just walking around, seemingly aimless. Surveillance footage from a gas station convenience store shows him in the hours after the murders. He's wearing jeans, a striped jacket, and a baseball cap. A red backpack is slung over one shoulder. He walks into the store calmly, browses for a moment, and purchases a drink. There's no sense of urgency, no panic, no indication that anything is wrong. He looks like any other person stopping for a snack on an ordinary day. Minutes later, another video captures what happens next. Nick is walking near a crosswalk when multiple police vehicles with flashing lights suddenly surround him. Officers emerge from their cars, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The video shows Nick stopping in his tracks. He doesn't try to run. He doesn't resist. He simply raises his hands above his head, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. Officers move in, cuff him, and place him in the back of a patrol car. Just like that, Nick Reiner was in custody, the son of one of Hollywood's most respected directors, now a murder suspect. 2 days later, on December 16th, the Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman held a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and journalists from around the world. Hochman, a seasoned prosecutor known for his tough stance on crime, stood at the podium and announced the charges. Nick Reiner was being charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But it wasn't just first-degree murder. The charges came with a special circumstance. the special circumstance of multiple murders. That detail is critical. In California, special circumstances can elevate a murder charge, making the defendant eligible for harsher penalties. Hawkman made it clear this wasn't being treated as a crime of passion or an accident. This was premeditated, deliberate, and brutal. The special circumstances meant that if convicted, Nick could face life in prison without the possibility of parole, or potentially the death penalty. When asked if prosecutors would seek the death penalty, Hawkman paused. He said the decision hadn't been made yet, but that his office was considering all options. The message was clear. This case was as serious as it gets. 2 people were dead, and someone was going to pay. On December 17th, Nick made his first court appearance. The Clara Shortridge Foltz Criminal Justice Center in downtown Los Angeles was buzzing with activity. Media crews camped outside waiting for a glimpse of the accused. Inside the courtroom, Nick was brought in wearing shackles and a blue suicide prevention smock. The smock is a thick, tear-resistant garment designed to prevent inmates from harming themselves. It's a standard precaution for high-risk detainees, and the fact that Nick was wearing one spoke volumes about his mental state. His appearance was brief. He stood before the judge, quiet and subdued. He didn't enter a plea. He didn't speak much at all, only offering short, barely audible responses when directly addressed by the judge. Standing beside him was his attorney, Alan Jackson. Jackson is not just any defense lawyer. He's one of the most high-profile criminal defense attorneys in the country. He's represented celebrities, politicians, and people accused of the most heinous crimes. His client list includes Harvey Weinstein, the disgraced film producer accused of sexual assault, and Karen Reed, the woman accused of killing her Boston police officer boyfriend in a case that captivated Massachusetts. Jackson doesn't come cheap, and his involvement signaled that the Reiner family, or someone close to them, was sparing no expense to defend Nick. Jackson addressed the court, asking for a continuance. He told the judge that this case involved very complex and serious issues that needed to be thoroughly examined. He emphasized that these issues needed to be dealt with carefully, thoughtfully, and without rushing to judgment. Jackson then turned to the media gathered outside the courthouse. He stood in front of a wall of microphones and cameras and made a plea. He asked the public, the media, and everyone watching to allow the judicial system to work as it was designed. Not with a rush to judgment, he said. Not with jumping to conclusions, but with restraint, dignity, and respect for the process. He didn't elaborate on what those complex issues were, but everyone listening understood what he was implying. Mental health, insanity, a defense that would argue Nick wasn't in his right mind when the murders occurred. Nick's arraignment was scheduled for January 7, 2026. Until then, he was held without bail at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in downtown Los Angeles. The Twin Towers is one of the largest jails in the world, a sprawling complex that houses thousands of inmates, many of whom are awaiting trial. It's also known for its mental health services, or lack thereof. Overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded, the facility has been criticized for years for its treatment of inmates with psychiatric disorders. And now, Nick Reiner, a man diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, was one of them. But who was Nick Reiner? And how did a son from one of Hollywood's most prominent families end up accused of murdering his own parents? To understand that, we need to go back. Way back. We need to understand the family he came from, the struggles he faced, and the mental illness that would ultimately consume him. Rob Reiner wasn't just a director, he was Hollywood royalty. Born on March 6, 1947 in the Bronx, New York, Rob grew up surrounded by show business. His father was the legendary comedian, actor, writer, and director Carl Reiner. Carl was a giant in the entertainment industry, known for creating The Dick Van Dyke Show and for his work with Mel Brooks. Growing up as Carl Reiner's son meant that Hollywood wasn't just a dream, it was home. Rob was immersed in comedy, filmmaking, and storytelling from a young age, but he didn't want to coast on his father's legacy. He wanted to make a name for himself. Rob first became a household name in the 1970s as Michael Meathead Stivic on the groundbreaking sitcom All in the Family. The show, created by Norman Lear, was unlike anything television had seen before. It tackled issues like racism, feminism, homosexuality, and politics head-on, sparking conversations and controversies across America. Rob's character, the liberal son-in-law constantly clashing with his bigoted father-in-law Archie Bunker, played by Carroll O'Connor, became iconic. The show ran for 9 seasons and won numerous Emmy Awards. Rob himself won 2 Emmys for his performance. He was funny, relatable, and talented, but acting was never his ultimate goal. He wanted to direct. In 1984, Rob made his directorial debut with This Is Spinal Tap, a mockumentary about a fictional rock band. The film was a critical and commercial success, praised for its sharp wit and improvisational style. It's now considered one of the greatest comedies ever made, a film that essentially invented the mockumentary genre. But Rob didn't stop there. He followed it up with The Sure Thing in 1985, a charming romantic comedy that put him on the map as a director to watch. Then came Stand By Me in 1986, an adaptation of a Stephen King novella about four boys who go on a journey to find a dead body. The film was a coming-of-age masterpiece, capturing the innocence and complexity of childhood friendships. It launched the careers of River Phoenix, Will Wheaton, and Corey Feldman, and it remains one of the most beloved films of the 80s. Critics raved. Audiences connected. Rob Reiner had proven he could do more than comedy. He could tell deeply emotional human stories. In 1987, Rob directed The Princess Bride, a fairy tale adventure that has been quoted by fans for decades. Inconceivable. As You Wish. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. The film became a cult classic, beloved by multiple generations. Then, in 1989, came When Harry Met Sally, a romantic comedy starring Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan. The film explored whether men and women could truly be friends without sex getting in the way. It was smart, funny, and heartfelt. The famous deli scene, where Meg Ryan fakes an orgasm and an older woman says, "I'll have what she's having," became one of the most iconic moments in film history. Rob continued his hot streak with Misery in 1990, a psychological thriller based on another Stephen King novel. Kathy Bates won an Academy Award for her terrifying performance as an obsessed fan who holds her favorite author captive. Then came A Few Good Men in 1992, a courtroom drama starring Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, and Demi Moore. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, and Jack Nicholson's line, "You can't handle the truth," became one of the most quoted lines in cinema. Rob Reiner wasn't just successful. He was a master storyteller who understood the human condition. He made films that made us laugh, cry, think, and feel. But Rob wasn't just a filmmaker. He was also a passionate political activist. A lifelong liberal, he used his platform to advocate for causes he believed in. He campaigned for Democratic candidates, spoke out on issues like marriage equality, health care, and gun control, and donated millions to progressive causes. He was outspoken, unapologetic, and deeply committed to making the world a better place. Some loved him for it. Others criticized him, but no one could deny his impact. Michele Singer Reiner was equally accomplished. Born and raised in New York, Michele was a talented photographer who captured some of the most iconic images of her time. One of her most famous photographs is the image of Donald Trump that appeared on the cover of his book, Trump: The Art of the Deal, in 1987. The image, shot in Trump's office, became synonymous with Trump's brand during the height of his business career. But Michele's work went beyond celebrity portraits. She was also a producer, working on various film and television projects. And she was a passionate advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, using her voice and resources to support equality and justice. Rob and Michele's love story began on the set of When Harry Met Sally. Michele was working as a photographer on set, and Rob, recently divorced from actress Penny Marshall, was directing the film. They connected immediately. Their chemistry was undeniable. They married in 1989, the same year the film was released, and by all accounts, they were deeply in love. Friends described them as a power couple, 2 brilliant, creative people who complemented each other perfectly. They used their influence for good, supporting charities, advocating for social justice, and raising their children with love and intention. Together, Rob and Michele had 3 children: Jake, their oldest son; Nick, their middle child; and Romy, their youngest daughter. Rob also had an older adopted daughter, Tracy, from his marriage to Penny Marshall. By all outward appearances, the Reiner family had it all: wealth, success, love, and a legacy that would last for generations. But behind the Hollywood glamour, there was pain. Specifically, the pain of watching their son Nick struggle with addiction and mental illness for most of his life. Nick's problem started young, very young. By the age of 14, he was already in rehab, not for alcohol or typical teenage experimentation, but for serious drugs. It started with prescription pills, Percocet and Xanax. Nick and a friend were caught using them, and his parents immediately intervened. They sent him to his first rehabilitation facility, hoping it would be a wake-up call. But it wasn't. Nick came out of rehab and almost immediately relapsed. The pills led to harder drugs: heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. Nick's addiction spiraled out of control. Over the years, Nick would enter rehabilitation 18 times. 18. Think about that number. 18 separate attempts to get clean. 18 times his parents hoped this would be the one that worked. 18 times they said goodbye to their son, praying he would come back healthier, stronger, ready to rebuild his life. And 18 times, Nick relapsed. Each time the cycle repeated. Detox, therapy, promises to stay clean, then back to the drugs, back to the chaos, back to the pain. In interviews and on podcasts, Nick was remarkably open about his struggles. He didn't hide from his past. He talked about how his addiction consumed his life. In one story, he described traveling cross-country while using drugs and ending up in a hospital, barely conscious and near death. In another, he described punching walls and destroying a television after his parents told him he had to leave their guest house. The anger, the frustration, the desperation, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Nick wasn't proud of his behavior. He knew he was hurting himself and the people who loved him, but he couldn't stop. Rob and Michele never gave up on their son. Never. They paid for the best treatment facilities money could buy. Some of these rehab centers cost up to $70,000 a month. $70,000. For 30 days of treatment. And Nick would go through multiple stays at these facilities. The financial burden was immense, but Rob and Michele didn't care. They would have spent every penny they had if it meant saving their son. They stood by him through every relapse, every outburst, every moment of darkness. They loved him unconditionally. But love, as they would learn, isn't always enough. In 2015, Nick and his father collaborated on a film called Being Charlie. The film was a semi-autobiographical drama about a young man named Charlie, played by Nick Robinson, who struggles with addiction and has a complicated relationship with his father, played by Cary Elwes. Rob directed the film. Nick co-wrote the script with Matt Elisifon. The film was their attempt to process the trauma they had both experienced, to turn pain into art, to make something meaningful out of the chaos. In interviews promoting the film, Rob talked about how the project brought them closer. He referenced the memoir Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction by David Sheff, saying it helped him understand what his son was going through. Beautiful Boy is a heartbreaking account of a father watching his son battle methamphetamine addiction, and Rob connected deeply with it. He saw himself in David Sheff. He saw Nick in Nick Sheff. The pain, the helplessness, the desperate hope that this time things would be different. Being Charlie premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2015 and was released in theaters the following year. Critics praised it for its honest portrayal of addiction. Audiences connected with its raw emotion. But the film didn't fix Nick. If anything, it was a snapshot of an ongoing battle, a battle that would only get worse in the years to come. Because addiction wasn't Nick's only problem. There was something else, something deeper, something far more dangerous. By 2020, Nick's struggles took a new and more alarming turn. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. This diagnosis changed everything. Schizoaffective disorder is not the same as schizophrenia, though the two are related. It's a combination of schizophrenia symptoms, like delusions and hallucinations, and severe mood disorder symptoms, like mania and deep depression. People with schizoaffective disorder experience a roller coaster of mental anguish. They might hear voices that aren't there. They might see things that don't exist. They might believe, truly believe, that people are conspiring against them, plotting to harm them, watching their every move. The mood disorder component adds another layer of complexity. During manic episodes, someone with schizoaffective disorder might feel invincible, impulsive, reckless. They might go days without sleeping, talking nonstop, making grandiose plans that make no sense. Then, just as suddenly, they might crash into a depressive episode. They withdraw socially. They lose interest in everything. They feel hopeless, worthless, suicidal. It's a brutal, exhausting, relentless condition. And for Nick, the diagnosis explained a lot. It explained the paranoia, the erratic behavior, the mood swings. But it also meant his problems were far more complex than anyone had realized. According to sources close to the family, after his diagnosis, Nick made a significant change. He stopped using illegal drugs, the heroin, the cocaine, the meth, all gone. For someone with an 18 rehab history, that's no small feat. But here's the problem. Nick didn't stop using drugs entirely. Now, his addiction was to prescription pills, and this is where things get complicated. When Nick would go to rehab, The facilities would focus on getting him clean off the pills. They'd detox him. They'd stabilize him physically. 30 days later, they'd send him on his way. But they weren't treating the underlying mental illness. The schizoaffective disorder, the delusions, the paranoia. Those issues remained, festering beneath the surface, waiting to explode. TMZ's Olivia Heinley explained this problem in their recent documentary. She said there's such a thing as dual diagnosis facilities, which are places that treat both drug addiction and mental illness. Rob and Michele would pay a fortune to send Nick to these places, but the problem was, he would only stay for 30 days. They'd get him clean off the drugs, then they'd send him on his way without treating the mental illness. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You're addressing the surface issue, but the real damage is still there, untreated, bleeding out. Dr. Drew Pinsky, an addiction specialist who was consulted for the TMZ documentary, put it bluntly. He said, 30 days for me seems almost meaningless for somebody with Nick's history. What you would want to do is put him somewhere structured and custodial for a very long period of time, maybe even permanently. Board-certified psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Witt Doring agreed. He said, for someone like Nick, who clearly had a very long, complicated history with substance abuse and mental illness, this is not something that can be dealt with in 30 days. This is something that requires a much more comprehensive, long-lasting plan that follows him out of the hospital. But that didn't happen. Nick would cycle in and out of rehab, getting clean for a few weeks or months, then relapsing. And each time, the schizoaffective disorder went untreated. Until, finally, doctors decided to address it. Nick was placed on medication specifically designed to manage his schizoaffective disorder, antipsychotic medications, mood stabilizers, drugs that, when properly calibrated, can help someone with this condition live a relatively stable life. And for a while, it worked. Nick was stable. He was functional. He was living on his parents' property in a guest house, yes, but he was stable. Rob and Michele were cautiously hopeful. Maybe finally they had found a solution. Maybe finally their son could have a normal life. But then, about a month before the murders, something changed. Nick complained to his doctors about weight gain. Weight gain is one of the most common side effects of antipsychotic medications. It's uncomfortable. It's frustrating. It's demoralizing. For someone already struggling with self-esteem and mental health, seeing your body change in ways you can't control can be devastating. Nick told his doctors he couldn't tolerate the weight gain anymore, and his doctors, trying to accommodate him, made a decision. They changed his medication. What happened next was catastrophic. The new medication didn't stabilize Nick. It sent him spiraling. TMZ founder Harvey Levin, in his documentary, said the medication change messed Nick up profoundly. Sources close to the family say Nick became erratic, dangerous, and increasingly out of touch with reality. His behavior changed almost overnight. He became agitated, paranoid, violent. He would have outbursts yelling about conspiracies, about people out to get him. Rob and Michele noticed immediately. They were alarmed. They could see their son deteriorating right before their eyes. But what could they do? Here's where the system failed. In California, doctors have the authority to place someone on what's called a 5150 hold. It's a temporary involuntary psychiatric hold that allows someone to be detained for up to 72 hours if they're deemed a danger to themselves or others. After 72 hours, if the person is still in crisis, the hold can be extended to 14 days. It's designed for situations exactly like this. Someone who is clearly experiencing a mental health crisis, someone who might hurt themselves or someone else. But for reasons that remain unclear, no one placed Nick on a 5150 hold. His doctors didn't do it. His therapist didn't do it. His family couldn't do it without medical authorization, so Nick's mental state continued to deteriorate day by day, hour by hour. TMZ's sources say the Reiners saw what was happening. They were terrified, but they didn't know what to do. Nick was an adult. He was under the care of doctors, and despite his behavior becoming more and more concerning, no one took the step to hospitalize him. Experts interviewed for the documentary were blunt. Nick should have been contained during this period of time, one expert said. He should have been in a hospital, monitored, stabilized, his medication adjusted under close supervision. Instead, he was left to spiral, living on his parents' property while his grip on reality slipped further and further away. On the night of December 13th, 2025, Rob, Michele, and Nick attended a Christmas party hosted by comedian Conan O'Brien. Conan and Rob had been friends for years. They moved in the same Hollywood circles. The party was held at Conan's home, a festive gathering of celebrities, industry insiders, and friends. It should have been a joyful evening. a chance to celebrate the holidays, to laugh, to connect. But according to sources who were there, Nick's behavior was deeply disturbing. Multiple people at the party later told investigators and reporters that Nick was freaking everyone out. He was acting crazy. He would walk up to people he didn't know and ask them, "Are you famous?" over and over. "Are you famous? Are you famous?" It was bizarre, unsettling. People didn't know how to respond. Some laughed nervously, others walked away, but everyone noticed. At some point during the evening, Nick got into a very loud argument with his father. The details of the argument aren't fully known, but witnesses say Rob was clearly embarrassed and concerned. He chastised his son for his inappropriate conduct, his voice rising in frustration. The argument was loud enough that people across the room could hear it. Some sources claim the Reiner family left the party early because of Nick's behavior. Others close to the family dispute that, saying the Reiners had grown used to Nick's outbursts and wouldn't have left over it. One family associate told the New York Times that the family had grown accustomed to Nick's erratic behavior. It was their normal. But normal or not, it was clear that night that Nick was in a bad place. A very bad, very dangerous place. Rob, Michele, and Nick returned home to Brentwood that night. It would be the last night of their lives. According to prosecutors, in the early morning hours of December 14th, Nick attacked his parents. They were in their bedroom. Based on what sources have told TMZ, Rob and Michele were awake when the attack happened. They were not asleep. They saw it coming. They knew what was happening. And there was nothing they could do. The attack was brutal and sustained. Multiple sharp force injuries, stab wounds, over and over. Rob Reiner, the man who brought joy to millions with his films. Michele Reiner, the woman who captured beauty through her camera lens. Both were killed in their own home, in their own bed, by their own son. The medical examiner's report hasn't been made fully public, but sources say the scene was horrific. Blood everywhere. The violence of the attack suggested rage, chaos, a complete loss of control. This wasn't a quick, calculated killing. This was a frenzy. After the attack, Nick left the house. He didn't stay at the scene. He didn't call 911. He just walked away. By the afternoon, when Romy arrived and discovered their bodies, it was too late. Rob and Michele Reiner were gone. Hours later, Nick was arrested at a gas station near USC. He was calm. He didn't resist. He seemed almost detached from reality, as if the events of the morning hadn't fully registered in his mind. Police records show that over the 12 years leading up to the murders, the LAPD had responded to the Reiner residence 7 times, twice on the day the bodies were found, once in 2019 for a welfare check, another time for a mental health call involving a male, though records don't specify who. The remaining calls were for minor disturbances. It's a pattern that tells a story. A family in crisis, a son spiraling out of control, parents trying to manage an impossible situation, and a system that failed to intervene. On January 7, 2026, Nick returned to court for what was supposed to be his arraignment. The courtroom was packed with reporters, sketch artists, and observers. This time, Nick wasn't wearing a suicide prevention smock. He wore a brown jail jumpsuit. His head was shaved, likely a standard procedure at the jail. He sat behind glass in the custody area, quiet and still. His eyes were distant, unfocused. He looked like a man who wasn't fully present. Then, something unexpected happened. Alan Jackson, Nick's high-profile attorney, stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," Jackson said, "I have no choice but to step down as counsel of record." The courtroom buzzed with surprise. Jackson didn't explain why. He couldn't. Later, speaking to reporters outside the courthouse, Jackson said he was under a protective order and couldn't discuss the details. But he made one thing clear. Circumstances beyond our control, Jackson said, and more importantly, circumstances beyond Nick's control have dictated that it's made it impossible to continue our representation of Nick. He paused, then added, "What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the law of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder." That statement was explosive. Jackson wasn't saying Nick didn't kill his parents. He was saying Nick is not guilty under the law. The implication was clear: insanity defense, mental incompetence. An argument that Nick, in his mental state, could not be held criminally responsible for his actions. Jackson wished Nick the very best moving forward, then walked away from the case. A public defender, Kimberly Green, was assigned to take over. She's a deputy public defender with the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office, an attorney who handles cases for defendants who can't afford private counsel. Green stepped in, introduced herself to the court, and immediately asked the judge to postpone the arraignment. She explained that she hadn't had time to meet with her new client, to review the case, to prepare a defense. The judge agreed. Nick's new arraignment date was set for February 23, 2026. Nick briefly spoke during the hearing. When the judge asked if he waived his right to a speedy trial, Nick responded in a quiet, almost monotone voice. "Yes, I agree, Your Honor." That was it. Then he was escorted back to his cell. Outside the courthouse, Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman addressed the media. He said his office was fully confident that a jury would convict Nick Reiner beyond a reasonable doubt of the brutal murder of his parents. He emphasized that the prosecution was prepared, that they had a strong case, and that justice would be served. But the question on everyone's mind remained, what really happened inside Nick Reiner's mind? And can someone who has lost touch with reality truly be held accountable for their actions? To understand that, we need to look at the bombshell documentary that just dropped. On January 9th and 10th, 2026, TMZ released a two-part documentary called TMZ Investigates the Reiner Murders: What Really Happened. The documentary aired on Fox and is now streaming on Hulu. It features interviews with sources close to the Reiner family, legal experts, mental health professionals, and law enforcement insiders. What they revealed is both heartbreaking and terrifying. According to TMZ's sources, Nick Reiner knows what he did. He knows he killed his parents. He's not denying it. He's not claiming amnesia. He remembers the attack. But here's the twist. He doesn't understand why he's in jail. Charles Latibaudiere, co-executive producer at TMZ, explained it like this. Sources connected to the Reiner family tell us Nick knows what he did. He knows that he killed his parents. But he doesn't understand why he's in jail. He's delusional. He thinks this is all a conspiracy against him. Let that sink in. Nick Reiner is sitting in a jail cell, fully aware that he stabbed his mother and father to death, but convinced that being arrested for it is part of some grand conspiracy. His grip on reality is so fractured that even though he knows what he did, he can't comprehend the consequences. In his mind, he's the victim, not Rob and Michele, him. He believes the police, the prosecutors, the entire system is conspiring against him, that people are out to get him, that he's being persecuted unfairly. It's a complete detachment from reality. TMZ founder Harvey Levin elaborated on this in the documentary. He said that about a month before the murders, Nick's doctors changed his medication for schizoaffective disorder after Nick complained about weight gain. The medication change, Levin said, messed Nick up profoundly. It threw his brain chemistry into chaos. The delusions intensified. The hallucinations became more frequent. The paranoia spiraled out of control. Nick became increasingly dangerous and erratic. His parents saw it. They were alarmed. But as the days went on, Nick only got worse. And no one, not his doctors, not his therapists, not the system designed to protect people like him, intervened. Levin added that even now, behind bars, Nick's medication still isn't right. The doctors in the jail are trying to figure it out, he said, but Nick remains delusional. He's still convinced there's a conspiracy. He's still unable to grasp why killing his parents would result in imprisonment. It's a tragic, disturbing reality. Nick isn't faking. He isn't lying. He genuinely believes what he's saying, and that makes this case all the more complicated. Experts in the documentary argued that Nick should have been contained during the period after his medication changed. Dr. Drew Pinsky said, "Someone in Nick's state should have been hospitalized immediately, not sent home, not left to fend for himself, hospitalized, under 24-hour supervision, with doctors adjusting his medication in real time, with psychiatrists monitoring his mental state, with safeguards in place to prevent exactly what happened." Dr. Joseph Witt Duering, a board-certified psychiatrist, echoed that sentiment. He said, "What happened to the Reiners is not an uncommon problem. This is happening all over the country. Families dealing with severe mental illness are left to navigate a broken system. They don't have the resources. They don't have the support. And when things go wrong, they go catastrophically, fatally wrong. So what happens next? Nick's arraignment is scheduled for February 23, 2026. At that hearing, he's expected to enter a plea. Based on everything we know, his defense will almost certainly argue not guilty by reason of insanity. In California, that defense doesn't require proving that the defendant didn't know the difference between right and wrong. That's a common misconception. What it requires is proving that the defendant didn't understand the nature and quality of their actions, or that they didn't understand that what they were doing was wrong. Given Nick's schizoaffective disorder, his delusions, his current belief that he's the victim of a conspiracy, that defense might actually work. If a jury believes that Nick, in his delusional state, genuinely didn't understand what he was doing, they could find him not guilty by reason of insanity. But here's what that means. Nick won't go free. He won't walk out of the courtroom and resume his life. Instead, he'll be committed to a state psychiatric hospital, possibly for the rest of his life. He'll receive treatment. He'll be monitored. And he'll only be released if and when doctors determine he's no longer a danger to himself or others. If Nick is found guilty, the consequences are far more severe. He faces life in prison without the possibility of parole, or potentially the death penalty. Though it's worth noting that California hasn't executed anyone since 2006, and there's currently a moratorium on executions in the state. So even if prosecutors seek the death penalty and a jury recommends it, Nick would likely spend the rest of his life on death row without ever being executed. Either way, Nick will never be a free man again. Multiple sources have told TMZ that Nick is not competent to stand trial in his current state. He's still reeling behind bars, well aware he killed his parents, but believing he's in jail because of a conspiracy. That's not the mind of someone ready to face justice. That's the mind of someone lost in a labyrinth of delusion, unable to find his way out. But what about the victims? Let's not forget Rob and Michele Reiner, two people who dedicated their lives to art, to activism, to love, two people who did everything they could to save their son, and two people who paid the ultimate price for a system that failed them. Rob's friends and collaborators released a joint statement after the murders. Albert Brooks, Billy Crystal, Larry David, Martin Short, Barry Levinson, Mark Shaman, and Alan Zweibel, all legends in their own right, wrote a heartfelt tribute. There is no other director who has his range, they wrote. He was always at the top of his game. He charmed audiences. They trusted him. They continued. Michele and Rob Reiner devoted a great deal of their lives for the betterment of our fellow citizens. They were a special force together. Dynamic, unselfish, and inspiring. We were their friends, and we will miss them forever. The statement was a testament to the impact Rob and Michele had on those who knew them. They weren't just successful, they were loved. Director Martin Scorsese, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, wrote a personal essay about Rob that was published in the New York Times on Christmas Day. Scorsese wrote about how he met Rob through mutual friends in 1970s Los Angeles. He described Rob as funny, thoughtful, and endlessly creative. I loved hanging out with Rob, Scorsese wrote. He said he regretted having to use the past tense to describe them. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the loss. Rob wasn't just a colleague, he was a friend. And now he's gone. Rob and Michele's other two children, Jake and Romy, released their own statement shortly after the murders. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day, they wrote. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michele Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. The statement was raw, honest, and heartbreaking. Jake and Romy didn't just lose their parents. They lost their best friends, and they lost them in the most violent, senseless way imaginable. They also made a specific request. They asked for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity. That request feels especially important now. Yes, Nick is accused of a horrific crime, but he's also a victim of a broken mental health system, a victim of a disease that robbed him of his grip on reality, a victim of doctors who changed his medication without adequate monitoring. That doesn't excuse what happened. It doesn't bring Rob and Michele back, but it does help us understand how something so unthinkable could occur. This case raises so many questions. Questions about mental health treatment in America. Questions about how we care for people with severe psychiatric disorders. Questions about what families are supposed to do when the system fails them. Rob and Michele Reiner did everything they could. They spent fortunes on treatment. They stood by their son through 18 rehab stints. They gave him a place to live. They never gave up on him. They loved him unconditionally. And yet, it wasn't enough. Because the system is broken. 30-day rehab programs don't work for people with complex dual diagnoses. They just don't. You can't treat decades of addiction and severe mental illness in 30 days. It's impossible. Changing someone's medication without close monitoring can be catastrophic. And it was. Failing to place someone on a psychiatric hold when they're clearly in crisis can be deadly. And it was. These aren't hypothetical problems. These are real, systemic failures that cost Rob and Michele Reiner their lives. Dr. Whit During, in the TMZ documentary, said it best. What happened to the Reiners is not an uncommon problem, This is happening all over the country. Families are struggling. People with mental illness are falling through the cracks. And when the system fails, people die. Sometimes it's the person with the mental illness who dies by suicide. Sometimes it's the people around them who die in acts of violence. Either way, the outcome is tragic, and it's preventable. Nick Reiner's story is a tragedy on every level. A son who couldn't escape his demons. Parents who loved him unconditionally but couldn't save him. A mental health system that failed all of them. And now, 2 lives are gone. 2 brilliant, generous, beloved people are dead. And their son, the person they loved more than anything, is sitting in a jail cell, lost in delusions, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he's done. It's heartbreaking, it's infuriating, and it's a wake-up call. As this case moves forward, we'll continue to follow every development. The arraignment on February 23rd, the trial, if it goes that far, the verdict, the sentencing. But no matter what happens in court, the truth is already clear. This didn't have to happen. With better mental health care, with more comprehensive treatment, with a system that actually worked, Rob and Michele Reiner might still be alive, and Nick might have gotten the help he so desperately needed. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse, please reach out for help. Call or text 988 for mental health support. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and it's available 24/7. Call 800-854-7771 for crisis response teams in the field or mental health resources through the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health Helpline. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't assume someone else will step in. Don't think it can't happen to you. Because as the Reiner family learned in the most tragic way possible, sometimes all the love in the world isn't enough. Sometimes the system has to work too. And right now, it doesn't. This has been the twisted case of Nick Reiner. A story of love, loss, mental illness, and a broken system. A story that should never have ended the way it did. Rest in peace, Rob and Michele Reiner. You gave the world so much. You deserved so much better. Your legacy will live on through your films, your art, your activism, and the countless lives you touched. You will not be forgotten. If this case moved you, if it made you think, if it made you angry, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think should happen to Nick Reiner? Do you think the mental health system failed this family? What changes need to be made to prevent tragedies like this in the future? Let's keep this conversation going, because these stories matter. These lives matter. And if we don't talk about the hard truths, nothing will ever change. Until next time, stay safe, stay compassionate, and remember, the truth is always more complicated than it seems. Thank you for watching.